help me reach 1,000 subscribers. It was meant to be nothing more than a quiet celebration, an evening to honor my wife's promotion, surrounded by a handful of close friends. I had spent the afternoon preparing for it, choosing the perfect gift. A sleek silver watch she had admired for months, and practicing a few heartfelt lines I wanted to say when I toasted her success. In my mind, I could already picture her expression. The warm smile, the spark in her eyes, the way she leaned gently against me when happiness felt too full to contain. I imagined pride, laughter, maybe even tears of joy. Never once did I imagine that the night would collapse into something that would tear the very foundation of my marriage apart. The evening began like any other celebration. Music playing softly, the clinking of glasses, friends chatting in every corner of the living room. She looked breathtaking in a navy blue dress that shimmered under the lights, her hair cascading over her shoulders like a dark waterfall. Every time she laughed, heads turned. I felt lucky, proud even that she was mine. People congratulated her one after another, and I stood there smiling, thinking about how far we had come together. Then I saw him, a familiar face from her office, someone I'd met a few times in passing. I noticed how close he stood beside her, how casually his hand brushed against hers as they spoke. At first, I told myself not to read too much into it. They were colleagues after all. But the look she gave him, soft, lingering, with a hint of something that used to belong only to me, made my stomach twist. My heartbeat quickened, and yet I told myself to stay calm, to keep observing, to not jump to conclusions. But then it happened, swift, deliberate, undeniable. He leaned in and kissed her. Right there in the middle of the room, surrounded by laughter, conversation, and people who moments earlier had been celebrating her success. It wasn't a playful peck or a drunken mistake. It was real, purposeful, and she didn't resist. She kissed him back. The sound in the room vanished all at once. The laughter, the music, even the hum of the air conditioner. Everything faded into a low, dull roar in my ears. My hands went numb. Every person in that room froze, their faces reflecting a mix of disbelief and pity. My chest burned, not from anger yet, but from the kind of shock that leaves you hollow. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't demand an explanation. I just stood there, watching her realization dawn slowly, her face draining of color as the magnitude of what she had done sank in. My voice came out steady, almost too calm, slicing through the silence that had swallowed the room. It's over. The words felt heavier than anything I'd ever spoken. She turned instantly, eyes wide, panic replacing whatever fleeting thrill had been in her expression moments earlier. The man stepped back, his arrogance dissolving into awkward shame. It's over, I repeated, my tone final, unshakable. And in that moment I knew there was no coming back. She stammered something incoherent. Wait, it's not what it looks like. Please, I didn't mean. But the excuses sounded hollow even to her own ears. The kiss wasn't an accident. The pleasure had been mutual. The betrayal was complete. I didn't argue or yell. I simply watched as she fell apart before everyone's eyes. The strength she had carried with such grace all night shattered into pieces. Tears spilled down her cheeks. She trembled as if the weight of her own choices was suffocating her. Around us, people whispered in uneasy tones, some offering sympathetic glances, others simply frozen, unsure whether to look away or stay. He, the man who had just kissed my wife, mumbled an apology and slipped quietly out the door, leaving her to drown in the wreckage he helped create. She reached out to me, her voice breaking. Please, I didn't mean to hurt you. I don't love him. I love you. Her words fell flat, lifeless, stripped of all meaning. I shook my head, not with anger, but with the kind of exhaustion that comes when something inside you finally gives up. You chose this, I said quietly. You chose him, you chose that moment, and you destroyed everything we built. She covered her face with her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. The sound of her crying filled the room, and yet it didn't move me. I wasn't numb because I didn't care. I was numb because I had already accepted the truth. Betrayal changes something inside you forever. When I walked out of the living room, it wasn't to flee or to make a scene. It was to reclaim whatever was left of my dignity, to breathe again without the weight of lies pressing on my chest. Later that night, she came to our bedroom, her eyes red and swollen, her voice barely a whisper. Please, she begged. I can fix this. I made a mistake. I love you. Don't leave me. But love wasn't the problem anymore. Trust was. And once trust breaks, no amount of pleading can rebuild it. I looked at her and in a calm, almost gentle tone, I told her the truth she needed to hear. You already lost us. Love means nothing when honesty is gone. She fell silent after that, staring at me through tears that no longer held any power. I stayed just long enough for her to understand what those words truly meant, for her to realize that the world she had taken for granted had collapsed because of one choice, one moment she could never undo. The days that followed were quiet, eerily so. She avoided me, moving through the house like a ghost burdened by guilt, while I focused on finding myself again. Everyone knew what had happened. The story of her betrayal spread quickly, whispered through friends and colleagues. The humiliation was public, but the clarity it brought was private. Some wounds don't heal, but they teach. And strangely, in that silence I found peace. I realized that night had freed me from illusions, from believing in someone who no longer valued what we had. She kissed another man in front of everyone, and in doing so she showed me the truth I had refused to see. When I said, "It's over," I didn't just end our marriage. I ended the part of myself that kept holding on to a lie. And for the first time in a long time I walked away knowing exactly who I was, and who she no longer was to me.